revitalization. So last time, for those of you who are here, we talked about endangered languages and some interesting features about them. That was more of a theory-heavy one. And so this time we're going to talk a little bit about some linguistic features, but we're mainly going to focus on the efforts to bring these languages back. So language revitalization, broad overview, is generally the process by which usually an indigenous community reclaims their linguistic heritage, and there's often a large cultural component there as well.
Are Jews indigenous to Israel?
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, so this is a topic that would take 30 hours to properly address.
Sorry.
I
couldn't resist. I couldn't fucking resist.
I know, God. So here's what we're gonna do. So we're gonna talk about some central questions to frame this conversation. Then we're gonna look at 3 languages. Those are Hawaiian, Welsh, and Hebrew. And so we're going to get into those and the 3 themes of that kind of inflect the process of their revitalization. And then we'll talk about the complex ethical considerations that are involved and have been involved historically. Then it says small group discussions. This will be a small group discussion. It will also be a whole group discussion. But yeah, so that's what we're going to do. Yeah, sorry, a little text heavy. But so what I want people to think about, why revitalize in the first place? Oftentimes, and this is kind of ties into the bullet 3 on there, government and the community aims do not have very much to do with the linguist goal, which is typically around preserving linguistic diversity. Maybe there's often a social justice component because a lot of these languages were repressed, sometimes pretty brutally. And so helping as a consultant to bring back the language can be seen as a way of repairing a historical wrong. However, governments and communities might care for different reasons. Often it's tied to a state or national project or cultural identity. So when it says, why do we care, who the we is pretty critical. The next bit, this is a 2-part question, as there are 2 questions in there. What makes an effort successful? What factors contribute to people taking up the language and using it in everyday life? But secondly, is that what success is? Is success usage? Is success fluency? Or is success maybe cultural connection? You have cases like Irish where you have K-12 or their equivalent education mandatorily in the Irish language. As in the language of instruction is English, but they are taught Irish as a foreign language. But it is not very much spoken in the country. Yet there is a deep cultural pride, and there's still increasing usage, but not so much of a brought back, fully revitalized language, not on the scale of, say, a language like Hebrew, which has full societal adoption. And then, so the role of linguists is critical. Some of the readings, Ladefoged's, for example, maybe I'm saying that wrong, says that linguists should be pretty hands-off. And not be too aggressive, and should not presume to know what the community wants. Others think that linguists can have a pretty good idea of what a community wants, and that you can veer into chauvinism at times. So yeah, we're going to pay attention to where we as linguists, in this mostly non-linguist room, fit into this. But yeah, so, and yeah, overall, I think the really big question is how far should we go and why in revitalizing a language? Because there are trade-offs, always. Sometimes it comes at the cost of minority languages. In the case of Hebrew, that happened. We'll talk about that in a sec. Sometimes it's just not a very relevant political goal for a government, and they have bigger problems on their plate. And frequently there are sometimes negatives to revitalizing languages, especially ones of smaller, more insular communities. And this is controversial, but very often national languages are seen as a unifying project. Like in the case of Swahili, for a lot of tribes to have their languages preserved instead of learning Swahili was seen as undermining national projects, and so governments were actually not that keen on it. So that can be a surprising case to think about. So there are trade-offs just across the board. Sorry, another text-heavy slide. But this is a brief history of the languages and their peaks and valleys of usage. So just to start with Hawaiian, L1 means first language, so there are about 400 to 800,000 native speakers of Hawaiian when Captain Cook first contacted them in 1778. The island remained under indigenous rule for quite some time. The Hawaiian Constitution, the first Hawaiian Constitution, was written in Hawaiian, but sometime later, the language is outlawed in schools, though unlike other indigenous languages, the usage is not banned outright, it is just no longer permitted as the language of instruction. And it takes almost 100 years to be re-permitted in schools. That's 1987. And in between, before the re-permission, you have revitalization efforts begins. 1983 is in bold because that's when you get the first immersion preschools, where elders every day would speak to, I think, children from the age of 2 and 5 in Hawaiian. So that program, those are translated in English as language nests and is a very large model today for other languages trying to be revitalized because it promotes the intergenerational transmission. So that model comes out of Hawaii. In 2007, you reached the lowest point of native speakers, with 300 speaking it natively and only 2,000 knowing it as a second language. That's what L2 means, second language. And now it is very hard to find modern statistics for what it is presently, but in 2011 it was 24,000, or 0.2% of Hawaii. Though it is considered a pretty large success. I was unable to find US Census data that specifically talked about Hawaiian, though it said Austronesian languages had about, I think, 500,000 speakers in the US, but that is a very big category. It's just Hawaiian happens to be a major Austronesian language. I found one website that said 327,000 speak Hawaiian, but that seems like a dubious number to me at least. I couldn't find a source backing that up. So that is a brief history of Hawaiian. So then you have Wales and Welsh. Prior to it being incorporated into England, you had full Welsh permeation in the society. However, a couple centuries after its incorporation, you have what are known as the Blue Books, or the treachery of the Blue Books. Blue Books in England are a parliamentary document, an official parliamentary document. And in this case, this treachery led to this outright suppression of Welsh. And after that, you see a pretty marked decline in those who know it. So by 1911, only 43% of the country knows it as a native language. It's about 1 million people. And it sees decline straight up through 2021, actually. At its nadir, the lowest point is 17.8%. In between, you start to see efforts to reverse this decline. This 1973 ulpan is actually borrowed from the Hebrew word, and it is an intensive adult education program designed on a Hebrew model, which was first done to integrate recent immigrants into the Israeli society, which essentially necessitates full knowledge of Hebrew. And then 2011, official national recognition. 2017, I cannot pronounce the word, but this report is published where they set the goal of 1 million Welsh speakers by 2050. And they've almost reached that goal. It is now considered the least endangered Celtic language. They have almost 900,000 speakers in Wales, many of whom use it daily or weekly. Which is an interesting contrast to Irish, where not many people use it daily, weekly, or even monthly. So the context in which it is spoken in are broader than even languages with comparable rates of fluency, which, how do we measure success? That could be part of it, not just fluency, but actual usage. Okay, finally, Hebrew. In the year 200, after about 1,000 years of usage, after a long period of decline, it ceases to be vernacular, stays inside a liturgical language of the Jewish people. And it is only until 1881 that revitalization begins. And it's a movement that starts in Europe, but is meant to be a unifying language, especially as Jews begin to migrate to land that is Israel and Palestine. In 1890, the Hebrew Language Committee is formed, and this is probably a pretty instrumental part of Hebrew being brought back. Because what they did was modernize the language and create a lot of new vocabulary, tens of thousands of new words, so you'd be able to talk about the modern world in an ancient language. For example, the word ma'ali, I can't tell you the actual etymology of it, but that means elevator. So you have to invent these words for things that don't exist. And oftentimes, and the reason this takes a committee instead of just waiting for these naturally to emerge is they would like to go back and kind of find things that make etymological sense, that make sense with the rest of the language, to kind of have a certain integrity and internal coherence. 1913, there's an event known as the War of the Languages. This has to do with minority languages and European languages, such as Yiddish, being pretty actively suppressed, especially through around 1948, when Hebrew is fully officially adopted as the language of the state of Israel. And you have the first program, as mentioned in the Welsh case, the adult immersion program. And yeah, there's a fairly dark history to some aspects of this. It is not just a unifying project, but you see the suppression of Yiddish, Ladino, that's Judeo-Spanish, and Judeo-Arabic. And there are in fact riots at Yiddish theaters and cultural centers and attempts at arson, because it is seen by a segment of the population as a language of an older culture that does not have as much of a place in a modern Israel. So then in 1953, so that's very complicated, and the context is very important there, and means that we have to speak about revitalization in a careful way, and think again about those trade-offs. We've lost linguistic diversity, which is often a goal of revitalization, to preserve diversity. So then the Hebrew Language Committee kind of becomes the Academy of the Hebrew Language. Similar set-up project to update it. It's like the French Academy, also meant to preserve the, quote, integrity of the French language, the integrity of the Hebrew language, and regulate what is borrowed in, how things are said, or how language change happens. This has achieved the highest prevalence of any language revitalization, with 5 million people speaking it as their native language, and another 4 million knowing it as a second language, and that's modern Hebrew specifically, not ancient Hebrew, which is harder to estimate fluency of course. And the real thing to note here is that it is the language of Israel. It is an official state language. It is required for full economic and political participation in Israeli society. And that is, and so it is considered the most successful language revitalization in human history. I mean, as far as we know, of course. Yeah, so before we get onto this, so something that's really important and came up a little bit in the TED Talks and whatnot, is intergenerational transmission. Good. And yeah, I don't know, there are so many stories of people who have like family members that knew languages and didn't transmit them. So I don't know if anyone has a story of like language loss or language shift.
I can start talking if you want.
Go ahead.
If you want me to.
Go ahead.
I mean, my great grandparents spoke Yiddish.
Yeah.
My grandmother spoke Yiddish, like in a gossipy kind of way. My mom doesn't speak Yiddish, and I don't speak any Yiddish. My grandmother spoke fluent Spanish, and then I'm not sure. I think my aunt speaks Spanish, but my dad wasn't taught it because the church. My grandmother went to the church and she's like, she, yada, and he's like, well, English is more important for economics, and et cetera, et cetera. So we just learned English and didn't learn any Spanish. But when I was growing up, I went to a bilingual Spanish-English school for the first until third grade.
Mm-hmm.
And when I would visit Albuquerque during the summer, she'd be like, "Oh, how's your Spanish learning going and whatnot?" I mean, I don't speak Spanish right now. So I stopped studying it, and I'm,
Yeah.
But that's a whole other story. But no,
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, it's easy to do, hard to retain, I guess.
Yeah, and there are a lot of cultural reasons, and that the economic point is a really, really interesting one because a lot of people have their kids' best interests at heart, and that is very often the reason. And they will often also kind of buy colonial propaganda that their language is simpler, not as complicated, not as intricate, and so it doesn't require deliberate instruction. So they'll kind of say, "Oh well, English is hard. Hawaiian or whatever language is easier," so they'll kind of pick it up by osmosis. But as we now know, that is not how early childhood language development works. So yeah, I mean, language loss, language shift, it happens in all of our lives, especially as Americans. Like, a lot of us have family that only came over here 1 to 3 generations ago. Yeah, we lose languages that way. And so, yeah, so let's get into just some cool features of some of these languages to kind of illustrate why it's interesting and important to preserve them. So perhaps the most interesting thing about Hawaiian is its phonology, in my opinion. I love phonology too, so that's part of it. It might have the smallest consonant inventory of any language, possibly ever. 2 other languages give it a run for its money, Ratakas and Paraha. They all have about 8 consonants. However, you might notice these weird squiggly signs. These things are known as in free variation. So you can say a word with a T or a K, or that question mark is a glottal stop, or the sound in uh-oh, the middle sound. So those would all mean the same thing. So you see these examples down below, ahi and I, those are the same word. Kane and ane, same word. And I would personally love to interview a native speaker to be like, do you actually hear these as the same? Like in the way that like we hear English indifferent and incredible, we hear that first N to both be N, when it's actually a separate sound. It's an ing before the K, the C, incredible. And that's something you don't realize until it's pointed out. So, but these sounds are so different, T, K, and glottal stop. W and V you can kind of see, but L and H and nothing, like surely like it is detected that L and H in the absence of those, surely that is recognizable to a native speaker. L and R, that is a pretty common thing to like, because those are both called liquid consonants, to have be in variation, free variation. But ing, n, and glottal stop, ing and n, again, we have that in English, the example I just gave, but glottal stop, that is a pretty unusual variation to have. And so this chart over here shows all of the ways consonants can become a glottal stop, and all of the sort of, and it can look a little random, like for example under the K column, why doesn't that H become a glottal stop? But the H here does. Like, is there some phonological constraints? I think that could be a really interesting thing to study, because clearly you can get 2 glottal stops in a word separated by a vowel. That's not the issue. So I don't know. That could be a really cool thing.
I have 2 questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you know if like the variation is done in like if like speakers have consistent patterns, or and if it's more of like an accent kind of variation, or if it's like just words?
Free variation typically means that an individual speaker will say it both ways, as opposed to dialectical differences where they pattern according to like where individual speakers are consistent. So yeah, and free variation also means that it's not conditioned of a change, which specifically means there's not an environment in which like one happens and the other happens where it's really clear cut and it's just thought of as the same thing. Like the indifferent, incredible, that example is conditioned. The N is occurring before a D, whereas the ing is occurring before a cut. And so you don't get it randomly, you don't get an ing before a d, you don't get an n before a cup with that prefix. So yeah, it is random is a word I don't think we like to use, but I think it captures what free variation kind of means. So your other question?
What does either 5 or 25 vowels mean?
Super interesting point. So Hawaiian has A, E, I, O, U, but they also have long versions of all of that. They have at least 8 diphthongs, 3 of which can be long. So so it depends on your analysis. I would say it has 25 vowels personally, but some people much prefer to like lump things together, and that's how you get the 5 figure. And I think it's interesting that so English has about 15 vowels depending on the dialect, but we of course have so many more consonants. I think it's interesting that they have so few consonants and so many vowels, and it kind of makes sense. You can get about as many contrasts and contrastive combinations as you can in another given language, despite this really small consonant inventory.
Oh yeah, I completely forget what my question was. Give me 1 second to remember. What
Totally.
Yeah, sorry. With all Hawaiian speakers right now being native English speakers, do you see any influence of English on Hawaiian and like the difference between these sounds becoming more similar? Or I guess lessening the difference between these sounds?
Yeah, I'm not sure if all native Hawaiian speakers are also bilingual with English. I think there is some.
I'd imagine.
Fluency
the vast majority.
Fluency is a scale, and the U.S. Census data actually does record like people who say they speak it fluently, they speak it very well, they speak it kind of, they don't speak it at all, and there are some people who like speak it less than very well, so there is that. But you do see a lot of loanwords to your question. A really interesting one illustrating that this really small consonant inventory and what happens is Christmas becomes Kalika Maka. So that's showing K goes to K naturally, but you first have to insert a vowel because you can only do consonant vowel of a syllable structure in Hawaiian. Not super uncommon in the languages of the world, but coming from English where we have words like strengths and that's 1 syllable, it's remarkable. The R goes to L. Those are pronounced around the same place in the mouth, so it makes sense. S and T, I think it's the S getting deleted and the T going to K. That is my analysis of this. But of course it could be the T being deleted and the S going to K.
Do Africans?
They have H. But then there's more systematic one-word studies in this. M stays M, they actually have that one. And this is why I think it might be the T being deleted and the S going to K. This S also goes to K.
But can it end with, I guess it would have in mind.
No, it can't. You can't have a consonant.
No, but you can
before
also
that.
add like a stick sa or something that had an S as a fricative.
Yeah.
Which I retract my question.
Okay.
Yeah. Never mind.
So Hawaiian phonology is really cool, very interesting, and they make do with such a paucity of consonants, which, to also see what direction this language would go, because it's like, you could say you get the benefits of diversity for linguistics if you just document, but that language is not just a frozen moment in time. It's also, how does it change? Where would a language like this go? Could they simplify even more, or will they expand their consonant inventory? Will some of these random free variation looking things, will those harden into actual distinctions? Because both things happen, things both lump and split in the trajectory of the languages. So definitely like a quote unquote reason to keep and preserve Hawaiian as a living language, not just as a cultural artifact. So everyone's favorite subject from last time, word order. So 2 things really cool about Welsh syntax. The first is verb, subject, object, word order. This only accounts for less than 10% of the world's languages. Yeah. Well, last time it was verb, object, subject. Which is even rarer. That's 0.3% of the world's languages. So you get this movement down from really low that goes high, that is the first part of the sentence. Whereas in English, it is just the subject moving to subject position, essentially. The other cool thing about Welsh syntax is also kind of a morphology thing. So you have this noun. I think I don't know how the C is pronounced in Welsh. But you have the initial consonant becoming something completely different when you have the pronoun for my in front of it. And the same thing happens with P. P goes to B when it's his head, but you see how A, it's the same word, but it's gendered, and the gendered is indicated by P going to B or P going to F. That's the only way you'd be able to tell if it's belonging to a male or a female, or someone who uses said pronouns. But yeah, so that's the cool thing about Welsh syntax. And again, like the direction this language will evolve, especially because you see movement towards subject, verb, object, word order over time. Would Welsh go this way? How long would it take to go this way? Again, an argument for preserving it as a living language. Finally, Hebrew morphology. One of the coolest things ever is Semitic morphology. I'm really big on Semitic languages, and this is a reason why. It's because you take... So true.
Is he getting a cold?
Oh, yeah, I am. Hello?
Hey, I'm locked outside.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay, I'll grab you.
Sean Counter. Is that
Where?
what I should know? Couturier. Sorry guys, the game started. Theo knows I told him this like 4 times that I was gonna watch the game.
And I love the Flyers.
Yeah.
Which one's that?
Hockey.
Which one's Dyers?
The Philadelphia
Philadelphia.
Flyers.
Yeah, man.
This is Ovechkin. We talked about
Oh,
him.
yeah, I saw the back of his shirt.
Yeah.
But I'm rooting against Ovechkin,
Yeah,
right?
you are. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because
Fuck
he's on
you,
the other
Ovechkin.
team. Yeah. That's Noah Cates. You know him.
Oh, I know him.
Yeah.
Come on. Does he have the puck? He looks. Oh, no, he
He,
doesn't.
no. Noah Cates. He had the puck there.
Oh, okay.
Does Welsh have broad and what's the other one? Broad and other one vowels?
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Broad and
I have no
like
idea.
Irish?
I don't know. I mean, they're both Gaelic languages.
No, yeah. Let me just look it up. One second.
Yeah. I only looked at the syntax.
I did not spell broad correctly. Oh yeah. Just looking up vowel consonants. Sorry. Okay. Just not me. Protestant. Okay, I can't find anything for Welsh about it, so I'm guessing it's just Scottish and Irish, Gaelic.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Which is what?
So there's different like consonants, I think, and I'm not exactly sure what they are. I just know it's like a thing.
Yeah, same.
Which I think it's like do you know what phryngilization is? I think one of them's phryngilized and one of them's like labialized or something like that. Yeah, well, one's butyrized. This is saying one's pedalized. I don't know Irish, but it's like an interesting difference apparently.
Now I'm so in the Irish language.
Yeah, Lily's TikTok algorithm.
Oh, yeah.
This is like been inundated with like Irish liberation content, and a lot of that's been like
I've seen
revitalization.
Dairy Girls.
Yes,
I love Dairy
I
Girls.
love Dairy Girls.
I
But no,
love
now I'm like
Dairy
really
Girls.
deep in it. Like
I
I don't
like-
know what else, but like a lot. Honestly, like a lot of Irish language TikTok pops up.
Oh my god,
A lot
kneecap
of,
came
like,
up.
Oh seriously?
Yeah.
Oh
yeah.
my god.
Oh, I'm so deep
That's
in
fun.
Kneecap talk. There's a lot of like get ready with me in Irish.
I've seen those before.
Ooh.
Yeah. Those are fun.
No, there's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and it definitely
Kneecaps?
speaks to the power of media. Revitalization.
There's a
Yeah.
huge boost apparently in adult Irish classes after
Interesting.
the new.
The old,
No, I've heard
what are they called? Old
Old Pan.
Pan.
I sent you a TikTok of the person covering a song in Irish.
Yes, you did.
Yeah. Like, hi.
This is Hannah.
Hello.
Hi, nice to meet you.
All good. There's pizza if you would like.
I would love a slice of pizza.
There's cheese, margarita, and pepperoni. So yeah. Yeah.
Does anyone touch the pepperoni, or are we
I
all
will have
Jewish?
it. Okay, so the basics of Hebrew morphology. I have 2 charts up here. We'll start on the left. is you have a 3-consonant root form, and this is common across the Semitic languages. So we're talking like Hebrew, Arabic, Aramaic, my love, Akkadian, and Phoenician. All of those languages are in one big family, and they share this underlying feature called a trilateral root, which is a way of saying 3. So this root here is often used on these kinds of paradigms is, so the V is actually a bait. It's B moved to V over time, very common in languages. Russian did it too, and people do it colloquially in English. So anyway, I'll refer to it as V though. KTV means, in the simple action, it just means zero when you have those A's in there too. However, you can add on things to the beginning of the word, as in these HIs, in these next 2 examples, and add in variety of vowels to indicate what is actually going on in the relationship of the word to the base word. What that means is you have the hictive root, and that is a causative. That means he caused someone to write, hence he dictated. Hitkatev, he corresponded. A reflexive verb is one where it is like an exchange, it goes both ways. So he corresponded, he wrote with someone else. Miktav is how you get the noun off the form of writing, and kativa is the action itself of writing. And you have all of these variations just coming off this basic form, and I guess for most people in the room, this is super elementary. But, you know, I think it's really cool stuff. And it's a very interestingly like mathematical way of going about things as far as languages are constructed. And yeah, and you alter these vowels even more to just, instead of changing it, just he's doing all these things to inflect for person, number, and gender. So like I did this, we did this, she did that. We're gonna have a different set of vowels. Now, people think this is really unusual and rare to change things in the middle of a word to make it mean something else. However, we do this in English all the time. Break.
Wrote.
Yes, literally. Right versus wrote, we just change the vowel in the middle.
Dido.
Exactly. Strong verbs of all stripes. And the second thing on the right is called the construct state, as it says, where on feminine nouns, to express possession, you have the possessed noun before the possessor. So this means lamp of wall, or wall lamp. And you have that T in there that is normally not there. I mean, you all probably know the word is menorah. It's menorat, to indicate that it is going to be possessed by the thing that follows it. And so that's an example of the construct state morphology, also very common in Semitic languages. So republicat bananot means republic of bananas.
Like the store.
I love
Like the
that.
store.
Oh, okay,
Like the
cool.
store.
That's so funny.
So like the store. Yeah.
Apricot banana.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great.
I think that rules. So yeah. Okay, we can take a break here. What do people find cool?
I think alternation phonology is interesting, of course.
Yeah.
Do you know what the proto-alternation like vowels?
Inventory
Yeah.
is like? I remember kind of looking at this for last time.
I think I looked it up actually while we were in.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think we should just do that.
Curious, yeah.
Because
I
I'm just
think it
curious
was
how many
much
diphthongs.
much broader. I mean, consonantally, and I
Well,
don't think it was
assume, yeah.
vocalically as rich.
Sorry, one second.
Yeah.
While you're looking that up, I think it's very interesting that in Israel I didn't really know.
Go ahead.
I didn't really know about this decreasing diversity of like that Hebrew was pushing out these other languages, and I find it, I guess not surprising, but I'm, just kind of like. Just the fact that the state of Israel was the state of Israel was partially created like as a response to the Holocaust, but then it was like the fact that like the majority of the world's the majority of the world's Yiddish speakers were killed in the Holocaust, and then they're still like
Suppressed again.
suppressing Yiddish again. I find that very.
Yeah.
I don't like that.
It's disappointing.
Yeah.
Israel is a very complicated relationship to the Holocaust and the Holocaust
Yeah.
survivors. And
Yes,
it's not
yes.
always the most honorable.
Yeah.
So.
But and
yeah.
I think I think the case of Yiddish today is still
Yeah.
very.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that is definitely something we could even be talking about like right now. And I think like
it is totally an example. Around the corner, there's the Jewish Languages Project, and I think they work on some 30 plus. It's at the Hebrew Union College. They work on some 30 plus Jewish languages. Of course, one of them is Yiddish, but they have them from all over the world, and a lot of them are in an endangered state because of actions taken by the state of Israel, which is very unfortunate. And yeah, it's not necessarily that bilingualism is not promoted. 85% of Israel speaks English. I mean, it's pretty important for dealing with these countries that they do. So it's not like bilingualism per se is disliked. It is specific languages associated with, like the old Jew, as opposed to sort of the new modern Israeli. So yeah, it's a really complicated history. Not a lot of people know about it, but definitely worth discussing.
It also this kind of started happening like even before the Holocaust began. I think what like it started like the 1910s or 20s discussion of Yiddish, like that.
Yeah, I mean it was associated also with like the shtetl mentality.
No,
you
yeah,
know.
and like the backwards kind of
Yeah.
old, non-enlightened, kind of
Not
non-intellectual
assimilated.
section.
Yeah.
that are-
Yeah.
Yeah,
So there's
I-
definitely that as well.
when you were I had to leave, but when you were talking about like that generational loss,
Yeah.
I mean I feel that like my grandparents didn't teach my dad Yiddish
Yeah.
like for that reason, and so now I don't speak it, and
Yeah.
like we're losing it.
Yes. Yeah. And Yiddish literature is very rich. It's very good stuff, I've got to say. I had a Yiddish poetry phase in 10th grade.
That's so real.
That's what I'm saying.
There's also like a big Yiddish theater culture.
Yes.
Yes.
There is. And Jennifer used to speak Yiddish.
Yeah.
Used to be a Yiddish theater.
I would love to learn Yiddish.
And it's a Germanic language with a lot of Hebrew
Yeah.
borrowings, so it is somewhat accessible to an English
Yeah.
speaker who knows Hebrew.
But I would love to not have to go out of my way to learn it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the thing with so many of these like language losses, and I think people in diasporas often think like that their language is going to survive because it exists in the homeland, without realizing necessarily that immigrant languages are also like a part of that global diversity, because like you get immigrant dialects and people often speak a different form of the language because they are not in as much intensive contact with people back home, so they develop their own varieties, just as much of a dialect as any English variety in America. So that's a really interesting dynamic people don't often talk
The
about.
thing about Yiddish is like there is no homeland.
Yeah, I mean there's like a
I mean,
There's a region.
well, yeah, there's a
I mean,
region.
it's not like
region,
us.
but
It's not
like-
homeland in like the true like country sense, but like there's
Yeah.
a home.
There's no
There's a-
institutional
there's an
backing
area.
for it.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
It's just
There's
not
no-
spoken there anymore.
It's not a national language, I think is what you mean. It's not like
Yes.
a national
Yeah.
nationalism sponsored language.
Yes.
Like Hungarian for Hungary.
Yeah, and I think that plays a big part.
Yeah. I mean,
Well,
and
that's
there's the expression that a language is a dialect with an army and a navy.
Yeah.
And Yiddish, no army, no navy, no flag. So that, has led to a different dynamic. Yeah.
But also going back to the immigrant point,
Yeah.
I mean some languages and like creoles and pidgins are created through not immigration. I mean that's like not the best word to use, but like through the movement of
Migration,
people.
contact.
Yeah, and migration, mostly forcibly, but you know.
Yes, yes. Well, trade is.
And also like pigeons are more
pigeons are
more
more
diverse, and
trade.
but creoles are a bit of a different
Yeah.
situation. What was I gonna say? No, but yeah. I keep blanking on my questions. Anyways, that's all I have to say for
Okay.
that.
Well, interestingly, Hawaiian pidgin, I think, is spoken by maybe almost 600,000 people, much more than like Hawaiian proper.
Oh, yeah.
So that is
What are the roots of Hawaiian pidgin? Like?
several substrates. Hawaiian is a major one, English is a major one, but there's several other Austronesian languages mixed in there. It's a reflection of the fact that it's such an intersection point for so many cultures.
I'd imagine also some Tagalog and Japanese and Chinese are probably included in that because of the sugar and pineapple industry and whatnot.
That sounds right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't go as deep into the pidgin, but yeah, it's a very major presence. So yeah. So as for like the themes that we see across these languages and what has made them what they are, there are three that I pulled out. The first has to do with like education and early learning. All places have implemented some form of, I mean, it sounds basic, but teaching people the language instead of relying on just transmission itself. Secondly, and some of them have been grassroots efforts, some of them have been more top-down, and that's what the policy and government intervention gets to. And finally, the economic and social incentives. Yeah, so just to get into that, here's some tables. So people have very different approaches. Like Hawaiian, it is not a mandatory language in instruction, but there are many immersion schools, and it is often taught on the Irish model as a foreign language. So you get a fair bit of fluent second language speakers and a fair bit of community engagement, and it can really be a bonding experience, especially, again, the intergenerational aspect. But at the same time, in terms of use in daily life, you don't get so much of that out in sort of the real world, and it's not the basis of communication. Welsh, like Irish, has mandatory education, K-12, I believe. So you see a lot of bilingualism, and again, almost 1 million speakers, 862,000. And we'll get into these social incentives later. But for certain government jobs, you are required to be fluent in Welsh, which is an interesting proposition, especially like, is that ethical, especially when everyone speaks English? Are you unfairly restricting government employment to those who could have had better tutoring in Welsh when they were in school or went to a better school? You maybe are restricting economic mobility. It's a trade-off, basically. Hebrew has instituted mandatory nationwide education, but it of course goes well beyond just the schooling systems. And they have achieved accordingly just full societal usage. It is the language of the country, and in the notes it's mentioned it's comprehensive policy, not just focused on schools. So all of these languages are recognized by the government. It is not necessary to revitalize a language with government support, but it sure helps, and it also means you can have universities backing you as well. In fact, the only master's and doctorate in an indigenous language you can get is at the University of Hawaii at Hilo, which is a pretty major accomplishment to have a fully taught degree in an indigenous language in America. So what you get with policy is you get more visibility, you get more speaker growth, and when you say have to use it on street signs and on like food packaging labels, it increases the daily usage and encourages the bilingualism. But yeah, Hebrew is a bit different. It is state-enforced monolingualism, as it says, and public life is conducted in Hebrew, even though, again, there's a very high English prevalence to the tune of 85%. And yeah, this is really what I want people to think about when we talk about something being successful or effective. How can you balance like these things of choice with encouragement, versus like the loss of linguistic diversity and cultural suppression? I mean, I think like a thought experiment that I've engaged in doing this series on endangered languages is like, what would we lose if we all spoke the same 8 or 16 major languages? And the answer is a lot. Like, cultural heritage is transmitted through language, and translation, that's another 20 hours of discussion, but you do lose something. I think everyone agrees on that. So yeah, and then finally, this is where things get, I think, pretty interesting of like, there are such diverse approaches, and these really get to the reasons why people learn languages to begin with, beyond just pure communication. So Hawaiian, again, akin to the Irish example, culture has a lot to do with it and cultural continuity, as for all languages. But this is really a community-driven revitalization, really not top-down at all, certainly relative to other attempts across the world. So yes, they've seen, again, a moderate increase in its fluency and usage, but again, it does not have major economic sway the way that Hebrew certainly does, and the way that Welsh does, since job opportunities, media opportunities, and public services are available to you. You do unlock things if you are fluent in Welsh. So for someone to learn a language, to learn Hawaiian, it's more about wanting to connect to their culture and their history and their community than needing to in order to get by or to advance in the world. So the Welsh outcome is, I describe it as voluntary and sustainable bilingualism. It is a growing language, but it is pretty opt-in after you finish your education. And Hebrew, it is pretty much necessary to know in order to get by in daily life, but this has had its drawbacks and controversies accordingly. So just 2 slides of questions now. Here's all the ethical, not all, here are some key ethical considerations. And a lot of this has to do with decision making, the decisions themselves and who makes them. And yeah, I think what it means to speak a language, why people speak languages, and why governments and linguists make the efforts they do in order to accomplish certain outcomes. So yeah, do people have thoughts about these? You can start anywhere or end anywhere.
I mean, the Welsh case reminds me of the Quebec kind of situation that's going on, which it's not like it's necessarily fun for non-French speakers in Quebec or anything, but
Yeah.
I understand why it's necessary. I mean, you said the lowest point for Welsh was in 2021, right? I mean, that's,
Yeah, it was recent.
that's 4 years ago.
Yeah.
There needs to be economic incentives, maybe
Yeah.
at least, to, promote the usage of Welsh.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's pros and cons, of course.
Yeah. Lily and I were in Quebec recently, and like once you leave Montreal, it gets really French.
No.
Yeah.
When you went skiing, or?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
It actually went well. Yeah. But yeah. Yeah. Has anyone been to a place where they have like an active language policy, like Quebec, certain parts of Canada, like Inuktitut is a big one.
I mean, I've been to Quebec.
What was your experience?
Well, it was very English friendly, except one time I was in a bathroom. I was 9 years old. I was in a bathroom, and then the lady who was cleaning only spoke French, and I was like, I don't speak French, and I was so stressed out because up until that point in class, they taught us French, but they had only taught us colors and shapes, and they literally didn't teach us how to say I don't speak French. And so when I got back to school, I asked my teacher, I was like, Madam Kohler, when are you going to teach us stuff I don't speak French? And she was like, oh, later. And I was like, and then she was like, yeah, and then she was like, and this is how you say red shape.
Yeah.
I was like, okay.
Yeah.
So that was my story about Quebec.
Yeah.
But other than that, everyone spoke English.
Yeah.
But this was in Quebec.
Yeah. No, I remember going to Armenia as a kid, and there's more and more English bilingualism, but I've never wanted to know another language more than when I was in such a non-English speaking part of the world, and it is certainly an incentive, especially a language like English with 1.5 billion global speakers, most of whom are second language learners. They learn it to be in contact with the English world. It is the language of business and economics and so many jobs and industries that you have to often make an active case, and one that has to do with the best interest of an individual in order to inspire a movement to actually take hold and be sustainable. So yeah.
this is not unrelated, but there's this interesting situation with Czech and Slovak going on right now. The country split, like 30 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
But they used to be like pretty much mutually intelligible. Maybe not entirely, but there's like enough familiarity with both languages from each side that you could have a conversation. But some people I know in Czech Republic, or just Czechia now, they don't understand Slovak very easily, or they have to actively study it if they wanted to understand it.
Because it's like split apart.
Yeah, Czechoslovakia goes from Czechia and Slovakia.
Right. Okay.
And they're both Slavic languages, they're both very heavily related. But I do think there's a lack of intelligibility between at least younger speakers.
Yeah, as a
in
political
both countries.
consequence. Do you think it's because like the languages have grown apart, or because like they talk to each other less?
I just think they talk to each other less, but also you have like a case like
Probably a little bit.
former Yugoslavia, all those countries, Serbia, Croatia,
Yeah.
Montenegro. I knew someone from Montenegro who I was talking to her about the language situation there,
Mm-hmm.
and he was like, well, I can understand Serbian pretty well, but if I go to Croatia, it's like every time I go there, it gets further and further apart. They have new slang and they have new terms, and they're just
The
moving
cultural
away.
sort of,
Yeah,
like spheres are different.
yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, national language policy. We were talking about this a little bit earlier with the various academies of like Hebrew has one, French has one, Arabic has one, of like making linguistic purity a priority. I was reading this memoir over break that was like purity